Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about China's series of countermeasures, fining American ships $4.46 million and also taking strong action against Korean shipyards. Meanwhile, the US is once again backing down. Trump said the US-China leaders' meeting will go ahead as planned. Because of the trilateral talks, Trump's attitude has become more distant. On October 17th, during an interview with Dr. Finance, a reporter asked him if he had received any congratulations from China for his efforts in brokering a Gaza ceasefire agreement. Trump said he had heard about it. The reporter pressed further, asking why China tightened rare earth restrictions afterwards. Trump responded, saying, "That's why I imposed a 100% tariff on all their goods." However, he made it clear that a 100% tariff is not sustainable, but for now, that's the only option. He continued, saying that the US has always had good relations with China. Yes, but he said that China has always been looking for advantages and has been extorting our country for many years. Trump reiterated that the tariffs he imposed are not sustainable and that he only did so because China forced his hand. He said that US-China relations will be good and that he has had a long-standing good relationship with President Xi Jinping, describing him as a strong leader. Trump said, "If you look at what Xi Jinping has done, you'll know he's an extraordinary person." However, the US needs a fair agreement. Trump said that he will meet with Xi Jinping at the end of the month when he attends the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea. Treasury Secretary Besant also recently said that Trump is looking forward to meeting with Xi Jinping and the two officials are working hard to arrange it. Earlier, Trump claimed that when the 8% tariffs on Chinese goods are imposed on November 1st, there wouldn't be much to discuss at the Trump-Xi meeting. He said the summit between the two leaders would be cancelled, as there's not much to talk about when both sides are so hostile. But now he says that both sides should continue to hold meetings. This statement marks a clear shift.
After Trump's remarks, the Chinese lead negotiator for China-U.S. economic and trade talks, Vice Premier He Lifeng, held a video call late in the evening with the U.S. lead negotiators, Treasury Secretary Besant and Trade Representative Greer. Both sides had a candid, in-depth, and constructive exchange on important issues in bilateral economic and trade relations, focusing on implementing the key consensus reached during this year's calls between the two countries' leaders. They also agreed to hold a new round of China-U.S. economic and trade consultations as soon as possible. Besant stated that both sides will meet next week to continue negotiations. From Trump's remarks and the resumption of dialogue between China and the U.S., it is evident that the U.S. position is rapidly softening, and both sides have returned to a relationship of dialogue.
In addition, China has continued to take action, not only strengthening controls over the US in terms of land, but also retaliating against the US in the shipping industry. The impact is greater than expected. On October 14th, based on the so-called Section 301 investigation results, the United States officially imposed docking fees on Chinese vessels entering US ports, and China responded in kind. On October 10th, the Ministry of Commerce announced that it would levy a special port service fee on vessels flying the US flag, built in the US, owned by US companies or with US company shareholding or operations when they enter Chinese ports. According to the Trade War News Network, the US charges Chinese vessels a fee of $50 per net ton, which increases year by year. Meanwhile, China's fee standard for American vessels starts at 400 renminbi per net ton, also increasing annually. Currently, American-built commercial vessels account for less than 1% of the global total, far lower than China's 60% share, and South Korea's 22% share of the global shipbuilding market. Foreign countries initially thought that since the proportion of US-built ships is low, China's port entry fees on American vessels wouldn't significantly impact the US. However, because China's fees target not only US-built ships, but also those owned, partially owned, or operated by American companies, essentially anything with American involvement, the scope of impact is much greater. According to a South China Morning Post report on April 17th, the Wanhai 805 container ship operated by US company Matson Navigation has become the first vessel to be affected. Although the Wanhai 805 was not built in the United States, it is operated by an American company, so it also falls within the scope of China's port fee policy. Ship tracking data shows that the Wanhai 805 arrived at Ningbo, China on October 13th and unloaded its cargo on the 14th, the very day the special port fee policy came into effect. It was charged 4.46 million renminbi by China and then left for Shanghai. Within the industry, this is generally considered the first case after the implementation of China's special port fee policy where a vessel was not fined. According to the global shipping authority, Lloyd's List, a 35,000-ton Chinese car carrier would incur annual fees of up to $5.6 million if it were to call at United States ports all year round. In comparison, since Chinese ports typically serve large bulk carriers with tonnage of over 200,000, the costs for American vessels docking at Chinese ports are also significant. It could be even higher. According to Lai Dabo, head of Lear Shipping at Maritime Information Company, the impact of US port fees on China is limited. He said that in 2024, global trade vessels will make a total of 86,000 port calls, of which only 254 will be to the US, thus falling under the scope of US charges. Damas, head of the UK-based Drury consulting firm, also estimates that only 11% of container ships traveling to and from the US will be affected. In comparison, China's countermeasures have a much broader impact, directly affecting far more ship calls at Chinese ports. This is because China is the world's manufacturing hub, and most exports are shipped by sea. Leiten said that since the shareholding structures of most shipping companies are usually quite complex and sometimes deliberately opaque, it's currently impossible to know how much American capital, such as US funds, has invested in shipping companies, nor can the full scope of the impact be accurately calculated. The initial focus will be on publicly listed companies since they have disclosed their major shareholder structures. However, many companies, such as shipping companies, may also be affected if they are held by American funds. Since US capital has a very broad global investment reach, the chances of being impacted are quite high. According to European shipping agents, China is putting pressure on US shareholders worldwide. Many companies are listed on global stock exchanges and may have a large number of American investors. Therefore, even though the policies of China and the US may appear similar, the actual impact of China's measures will be much greater. Now, as I mentioned in my morning report, shipping companies have already tried to mitigate the impact of the new regulations by adjusting their boards of directors. For example, the Greek company Okeanis Eco Tankers, which is listed in the US, announced on October 13th that 2 American directors, Lipo and Nemsas, had decided to resign. According to the shipping industry media outlet Tradewinds, these 2 individuals resigned to help the company avoid China's port surcharges. Okeanis Shipping Company previously had 2 American directors, which likely means that they had American shareholders who appointed these directors to the board. Even if the 2 American directors stepped down, the company could still fall under China's definition for port surcharges because of its American shareholders. In other words, if the ships have unknown shareholding or operational ties, or from another perspective, since the company is listed in the US, it's highly likely that there are unidentified funds that are their major shareholders. In addition, global shipping giants Maersk from Denmark and Hapag-Lloyd from Germany have also taken action, rerouting 2 US-flagged vessels to avoid Chinese ports. One of Hapag-Lloyd's container ships cancelled its scheduled stop in Ningbo and will instead call at Busan, South Korea. Maersk also stated that cargo originally destined for or transiting through Ningbo will now be unloaded in Busan, South Korea, and then transferred via the company's shipping network to other vessels for final delivery to their destinations in China. For cargo originally destined for Ningbo or shipped from the US, it will also be transferred to other vessels for transshipment in South Korea. It is reported that the affected ships were built in South Korea, not in China, and therefore are not eligible for exemptions on Chinese port fees. It can be said that this port dispute, once again triggered by President Trump's anti-China measures, has had a profound impact on American investments in global shipping and has also caused chaos throughout the global shipping industry. The US is now reaping what it has sown, while China's countermeasures against US shipping policies are not limited to just one move. In fact, on October 14th, China announced countermeasures against 5 US-related subsidiaries of the Korea Ocean Knowledge Conference Corporation. This time, I saw that they organized individuals to conduct business transactions, collaborations, and activities with them. As soon as the news broke, the stock price of Korea Ocean immediately dropped by 8%. Korean media lamented that China targeting Korea Ocean has dragged Korea, a small player, into a clash between giants. Recently, it's worth noting that, unlike previous measures, this time the sanctions against Korea Ocean are precisely aimed at specific companies, considering that Korea Ocean is a key part of the Trump administration's efforts to revitalize shipbuilding. This move is particularly significant. China's sanctions against Hanwha Ocean, which plays a key role, can be described as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only does it hit Korean companies that supported Trump, serving as a warning to South Korea, but it also targets Hanwha's use of Chinese rare earth steel and components, thereby undermining America's attempt to revive its shipbuilding industry with South Korea's help. For some time now, South Korea has played a crucial, timely role in the Trump administration's plan to make America's shipbuilding industry great again. Jang Seong-gil, Director General of Trade Policy at South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, revealed in July that during the US-Korea tariff negotiations, the Trump administration wanted South Korea to join the US in suppressing China in sectors like shipbuilding. South Korea's shipbuilding industry ranks 2nd in the world, and as part of the US-Korea trade negotiations, South Korea has already committed to investing $150 billion in the US shipbuilding industry. In addition to sending money, orders, and technology to the US, this shipbuilding giant is precisely a key part of America's plan to revitalize its shipbuilding industry. The Hanwha Philadelphia Shipyard in the U.S., which has now been sanctioned by China, was acquired by Hanwha Group at the end of last year for $100 million. The revival of the Philadelphia Shipyard is seen as a symbolic project of U.S.-Korea shipbuilding cooperation, and some even consider it a crucial part of the plan to make American shipbuilding great again. According to ABC, Hanwha Ocean has already signed a contract with the U.S. Navy. They provide maintenance, repairs, and overhauls for U.S. Navy warships, supporting the Trump administration's efforts to restore global competitiveness in shipbuilding. In stark contrast, Hanwha Ocean announced this May that it would withdraw from its joint venture in China. However, now that China has imposed sanctions on Hanwha Ocean, the company will face a series of disruptions in the supply of raw materials and components. Hanwha Ocean is one of South Korea's three major shipbuilding giants, but it has faced operational difficulties in recent years. That year, they barely managed to turn a profit, and in order to survive, they set their sights on the US, thinking they could land big contracts. But by helping the US counter China, they crossed China's red line. In reality, Hanwha Ocean relies on China's supply chain to survive. Hanwha's subsidiaries have long used about 3% Chinese steel in shipbuilding, and Chinese steel is 20% cheaper than domestic Korean steel. Now, if China cuts off supplies to Hanwha because of its ties to the US, other steel suppliers, afraid of offending China, might not dare to sell steel to them either. Otherwise, if China imposes secondary sanctions and cuts off the supply of rare earths or other metals, Hanwha would have to pay a heavy price. So it's not worth the risk for other suppliers to do business with Hanwha. What's most awkward for Hanwha is that its US shipyard expansion plan was originally set to invest tens of billions of US dollars to increase production capacity sevenfold. But if they lose access to Chinese parts and steel to support these plans, even if they force the project through, costs will skyrocket, turning it into a financial black hole for both the public and private sectors. South Korea's Defense Acquisition Program Administration Chief Aom Jong-geon said at a hearing in the Korean National Assembly that China's measures will inevitably have an impact. The US shipbuilding industry, along with its supporting parts industry, has long been in decline, making it impossible for Korean companies to source materials and components domestically when building ships in the US. He said he doesn't believe Hanwha can produce all the materials and supplies needed for the Philadelphia shipyard within the US. Even if they want to ship large quantities of these parts from Korea to the US, there are still issues. There are all sorts of obstacles due to Chinese sanctions, and other Korean companies are also unwilling to supply. He said that in the end, this will have a significant impact on the plan to make American shipbuilding great again. The conclusion is that the US is happy as long as China doesn't retaliate, so it keeps ramping up sanctions and increasing targeted measures. But once China does retaliate, it turns out the US can't actually get anything done.